Coming up, a full post-mortem on the general election. Plus, Belize becomes one of the first countries to ban gill net fishing.
You're listening to Brent's 2 Cents, the semi-serious thoughts of a guy in Belize. And now here's the host of this podcast from somewhere in Belize City, Brent Toombs.
Hey, welcome to the podcast for the week of November the 16th. Well, of course, the big news from last week was the election. Now, the fact that the PUP won did not come as a surprise to many, including myself. But I don't think many expected that the PUP would win by such a huge margin. Not just in the number of seats they won, but how wide the margin of victory was for the PUP in nearly every division. The PUP won 26 of the 31 seats in the House of Representatives, with the UDP only managing to hang on to seats in Colette, Albert, Queen Square, Mesopotamia, and Corozal North. Now, in terms of overall popular vote, the PUP got 59% of the vote compared to the UDP's 38%. The popular vote for the PUP in 2020 was only a few tenths of a percent less than what the Blue Party received back in 1998. Now, by comparison, when the UDP blew out the PUP 25-6 in the 2008 general election, they only garnered 56% of the popular vote. So this was the second biggest win by a political party in Belize's post-independence history. UDP leader Patrick Faber won re-election in Colette by 692 votes, while Deputy Party leader Hugo Pat won his division by 916. And those were the only two easy wins for the incumbent party. In Albert, Tracy Panton barely hung on to her seat, defeating PUP's Paul Thompson by only 41 votes. Now, in last week's podcast, I said that Mesopotamia might be in play, and it most definitely was. Shine Barrow won that division by only 159 votes. But considering his uncle Michael Finnegan won that division by nearly 1,200 votes just 5 years ago, the UDP can no longer consider Mesop to be a safe seat. And then one of the biggest shockers of the night came in Queen Square. Dean Barrow's once seemingly impenetrable fortress nearly went blue, as 25-year-old PUP upstart Alan Pollard came within 331 votes of defeating Sista B. A remarkable swing, considering that her brother won that division by over 1,700 votes in 2015. Now, when you look at the seats won by the PUP, there was really only one contest that was even close. In Kiowa West, Jorge Espat beat Erwin Contreras by 225 votes. But the 25 other divisions won by the PUP were either comfortable victories or full-fledged blowouts. In Freetown, where I live, I have to admit that I either overestimated O.J. Elrington or underestimated Francis Fonseca. Last week, I said that Freetown could be in play, and was the only seat that I could see the PUP needing to worry about defending. Well, my fellow constituents in Freetown made me look like a fool with that prediction, as the PUP won that division by more than a 2-to-1 margin. Francis Fonseca ended up with 68% of the vote in Freetown. Only Anthony Mahler in Pickstock and Cordell Hyde in Lake Independence enjoyed a wider margin of victory. So that's the election by the numbers. But what led to these landslide results? And what does this mean for Belize's two major political parties? Personally, I think change was inevitable. After 12 years, any party will likely be beyond their expiration date. Personally, I think a change was inevitable. After 12 years, any party will likely be beyond their expiration date. I expected this change would happen 5 years ago, but a combination of a badly disorganized opposition and seemingly endless Petrocaribe dollars helped the UDP win their historic third consecutive term. However, I don't think anything could have saved the UDP in 2020. The Belizean people were ready for a change, Plain and simple. But as I said at the start of this podcast, I don't think that many expected the PUP would win this easily and by such a wide margin. So how did that happen? If you ask me, the UDP sealed their fate earlier this year when they first selected John Saldivar to be their party leader, and then not only allowed him to run again in the second leadership convention in July, but nearly elected him despite mountains of evidence supporting the allegations against him. Sure, Patrick Faber eventually emerged as the leader-elect of the UDP, but the fact that Saldivar was not only allowed to run for leader twice, but maintained the support of 2/3 of the UDP sitting area reps and standard bearers destroyed any anti-corruption credibility the party had left. In February, everyone knew about Lev Derman and the tranches and the shitstorm that was coming just as soon as testimony began in Salt Lake City. Yet 21 UDP area reps and standard bearers remained fiercely loyal members of Team Saldivar. By the time the second convention was held in July, only one of those members of Team Saldivar had publicly defected. That was Shine Barrow. Patrick Faber did manage to defeat John Saldivar, but only by 19 votes. The total swing in votes from February to July was only 59. That means that out of the 342 UDP delegates that were prepared to ride or die with John Saldivar in February, only 59 decided they could no longer support him. Nearly half of the delegates in July, including the majority of sitting area reps and standard bearers, sent a message to the rest of us outside their party that they didn't care if Saldivar was dirty or not. They just expected him to win, and the only thing that mattered to them individually was being part of the winning team because they wanted in on the action. The optics from that convention was that the UDP had become corrupt to their core, and a change of party leader was too little, too late. Now, if there's a silver lining for Patrick Faber, it may be that the voters of Belize did a lot of the house cleaning for him. It's also worth pointing out that Hugo Pat is the only member of Team Saldivar to get elected. So now Faber has a pretty clean slate to start rebuilding his party. Sure, 2/5 of his caucus in the House are named Barrow, but many of his adversaries inside the UDP have been neutralized. So the next 12 to 18 months will be a golden opportunity for Faber to build a new UDP, without the likes of Saldivar and Castro and Contreras and Heredia and Marin and Vega and others who have become a liability to his party's brand. The PUP had a similar opportunity in 2008 and instead decided to wait it out until the electorate was ready to make nice and give them another chance. The result was almost 12 years of being nearly unelectable. How long the UDP will be banished to the political wilderness will depend on what alliances Patrick Faber makes in the months ahead. Now, for the PUP, it would be easy for them to assume that winning fixes everything. But I would caution the new Prime Minister to tread very carefully when it comes to estimating the electorate's tolerance for wrongdoing. The people voted the UDP out. They did not vote the PUP in. The expectations of Belizeans for this PUP administration are not exactly high, but then neither is the level of trust. And Prime Minister Briceño has to remember that this is a post-social media world he is governing in. A lot has changed since the last time the PUP were in power. We no longer have to wait for the weekly newspapers to bring out the dirt or give us the spin. We don't even have to wait for the evening news to give us their versions of the truth. Scandals and whistleblowing come to light in real time now. That creates a cumulative effect that, fairly or not, greatly skews the perception we have of how honest or corrupt a government may be. The honeymoon period for the Briceño government will be much shorter than you might normally expect, especially following such a massive victory. COVID-19 and the economy won't allow for much of a honeymoon at all. The PUP may not have to worry about the opposition party for a while, but the public is very restless. A lot of people are still out of work. The number of new coronavirus cases is climbing at a rate that is clearly out of control. And yet, despite the fact that Belize is now the most infectious country on earth per capita, a large swath of our population are either agitating for less restrictions or outright flaunting regulations intended to help control the spread. If the new Prime Minister and his cabinet actually want to control this epidemic, then they are going to need to make some decisions that will not be very popular with people who would prefer to pretend that the only option available is to just open up everything while we, quote, learn to live with it. So if there's anything that Johnny Briceño should spend his recent windfall of political capital on, it's doing whatever it takes to get COVID-19 under control, no matter how hard that medicine might be for Belizeans to swallow. Because everything else that needs fixing in this country right now depends on getting the virus under control first.
We want to hear from you. You can find Brent's 2 Cents on Twitter and Facebook at 2 Cents Belize, or email us at podcast@oshaproductions.com. That's OXA Productions with an S.com.
Your call has been forwarded to an automatic voice message system.
Hi, this is Brent. Thanks for calling the Your 2 Cents hotline. Please leave a message about anything you want to talk about after the beep.
Hi, Brent. Well, it was surely a kind of quiet voting day, but a very exciting night watching all the results coming in. So proud of Belizeans, the way that they voted, how they wanted to vote, apparently without too much influence. That was impressive to me, and the handover was just spectacular. The Farber conceding so quickly, and it was just a very exciting night, and I'm so pleased to see how everything happened and hoping to see everybody working coming into the coming days. Thank you.
And before I wrap up this episode, a bit of good news. It might have been overshadowed in the run-up to the November 11th election, but the previous administration passed a very important statutory instrument just before Election Day. SI 158 of 2020 bans the possession and use of gill nets in Belize's waters. The SI also renders all previously issued gill net licenses invalid. With this statutory instrument, Belize becomes one of the first countries in the world to put an end to gill net fishing in our territorial waters. Andrew Rowe is the president of the Belize Game Fish Association and a member of the Gill Net Task Force. He was nice enough to take time out of his weekend to join me on the podcast to explain how this ban will benefit all stakeholders in Belize. Andrew, thank you for taking time to speak with me today. Now, I know the efforts to ban gill net fishing began a long time ago, probably at least as far back as 1997. But it was only in the past few years that it seemed like this movement gained momentum. Can you explain briefly how we got to this point where Belize is now one of the first countries in the world to end gill net fishing?
Yeah, Brent, it's been a long time in the making. There's been a lot, especially from the sports fishing industry. There's been a lot of people who have been very involved from the outset for over 20 years at getting this ban. And it's because they realize this type of fishing is not going to be sustainable in the long run. Although it's very effective at catching fish, it's also destructive by that very nature. So, the fishermen catch what they're targeting, but they're also catching all sorts of other species. And that's where sports fishing came in, because they realized that some of the bycatch included these sports fish that are worth a lot more to the sports fishing industry alive than dead. So where it really started to gather some traction was in 2017. The Ministry of Fisheries decided that they were going to take a proper look at gillnet fishing in Belize. And so they formulated a task force. And that task force included representation from across the various stakeholder group that had any kind of interest in the marine resources that gillnet fishing affected. And there was a lot of representation from the gillnet industry. The likes of the Shark Fishing Association were on there. There were a whole bunch of other gillnet fishers. So it was important that they were involved in the process. There was also commercial fishing. So those guys who are fishing for a living, but not relying on gillnets, they're, relying on the same resources that gillnet fishermen and commercial fishermen access, but they were relying on it from a more sustainable point of view. And then there was tourism. The law enforcement was there by way of the Coast Guard and the Fisheries Department. And so this group took about a year, and they reviewed how gillnets were working here in Belize. And that actually included a survey. And there was more than, I think it was almost 2,500 participants or respondents. And it was overwhelming that they wanted to see a gillnet transition or gillnet ban. So when this gillnet task force completed its work, the decision was made by government that yes, a ban needs to happen. And that was going to involve a transition. And so, as I mentioned, there were a lot of people who were involved in this task force and looking at it. And so what we decided to do was form a coalition. And again, the coalition is made up of several NGOs who represent that kind of broad base who was involved in the task force. And the coalition decided that we were going to raise some money so that we could help these gillnet fishermen transition towards a ban. And that started out in 2018. And Oceania also had kind of a similar idea. And so jointly, the Coalition for Sustainable Fisheries raised $1 million, and Oceania raised $1 million, and collectively we ended up with $2 million. And that's what we had earmarked for this transition. The ban was passed in early November by way of a statutory instrument. That's SI 158 of 2020. And so that's where we are today. We're here in Belize with a gillnet ban, one of the first in the world, as you pointed out, Brent.
Now, how many fishers are we talking about that are going to have to transition out of gillnet fishing? And what sort of things will they be able to, or what sort of help will they be able to access, with that fund that's available to make that transition away from gillnet fishing?
Yeah, so we started out with 83 fishermen, and that was the number of licensed gillnet fishermen who were licensed in 2018. That information was provided by the Fisheries Department. But when we got the list, we realized there were, a few names came off, either because there were a handful that had actually passed away and people were just renewing their licenses. And there was a number of Guatemalan fishermen, so Guatemalans who either were residents in Belize or part-time came to fish in Belize. And between the coalition and Oceania, we said, you know what, the money that we've raised is going to go to the Belizean fishers. So those names came off the list, and we ended up with about somewhere around 50 fishermen. And so that money is the $1 million that the coalition has put forward is designed to help these guys transition away from gillnet fishing and to some sort of economic alternative that will replace that income that they're losing from the gillnet fishing. And I think, Brent, what we did find out when we were doing this, research into these fishermen is none of them rely 100% on gillnet fishing for their income. It's very seasonal, and so they do other things, whether it be fishing or something different. So really, this money that the coalition has raised and is helping them transition with is to kind of build on those other income sources that they already have. So most of them are putting this money back into fishing, and it's going to help them boost the type of fishing that they do already, whether it be for lobster, finfish. Some of them are already involved in alternatives like seaweed farming and deep slope fishing. And so they're putting that money into those resources, while a handful of others are doing a couple other things. There's a few guys who want to invest in some farm equipment. There's actually one guy who wants to open up an ice cream parlor. So that's kind of where the money from our end is going. Oceania's side, their money is kind of a buyback. So they're buying the nets back from these fishermen, and they're providing them a 2-year source of funding that's made on a monthly contribution. And again, that's the kind of, this is where this is very cool, because you have one organization helping them build that those economic opportunities they have, while you have another organization who's kind of helping to fund the process as it's going along and replace some of the income that they are losing while they get their hands on these alternatives.
Well, Andrew, this is really some good news. And I think all Belizeans take great pride whenever we demonstrate to the world that we can be good stewards of our environment and take care of all these wonderful natural resources that our country's been blessed with. So I just want to say thank you very much to yourself and Oceana and everyone, including the fishers themselves, who work so hard to make this gillnet ban happen.
Yeah, and I think the fishermen definitely deserve a lot of credit in this. This has by far been their initiative. Without them, it wouldn't have happened.
Andrew, thank you very much for taking time to speak with me.
Thanks, Brent.
Okay, before I wrap up, I want to give a shout out to Renisha Gentle and her podcast, The Gentle Perspective. Renisha had previously released a few excellent short episodes on YouTube, but now she's jumped into podcasting with both feet, and her show is available on all the major podcast platforms. So The Gentle Perspective is definitely a Belizean podcast I recommend you add to your subscription list. Remember, you can be part of the podcast movement in Belize by sharing this show with at least one person who otherwise may not know about it. And don't forget to subscribe to Brent's 2 Cents on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can contact me anytime on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at 2 Cents Belize. And I'm even on TikTok, so give me a follow there as well. You can also leave me a voice message to play on a future episode of the podcast by clicking on the link you'll find in the description for the show. Hey, if you enjoy Brent's 2 Cents and you want to chip in to help cover the costs of producing and distributing this podcast, you can buy me a coffee for only $3 US or $6 Belize. You'll find the link for Buy Me a Coffee in the description for the show. And that's going to do it for episode 17 of Brent's 2 Cents. I want to wish everyone a happy Griffin Settlement Day, but please celebrate responsibly, preferably virtually, from your own home, with only the people you actually live with. COVID-19 is not going to take the 19th of November off. So until next time, continue to wear your masks, wash your hands, stay home as much as possible, and most importantly, be nice to each other.
Brent's 2 Cents is a presentation of OSHA Productions, Belize's affordable professional video production company.